Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to be sharing with you a painting process. This is the process that I use to paint the Cowboy Bebop illustration that you saw me post. It'll be a step-by-step, and in order to do that I wanted to start something simple so that you just get a sequential idea of how each brush is used, how I'm kind of approaching my paintings, and then you'll hopefully be able to follow along because it's not a convoluted mess of a million hours of me painting something giant. So we're going to be focusing on doing a small blobby Kirby and then painting it to hopefully some version of a finished product. So yeah, let's get into that. You won't be seeing the video here of me talking the whole time because I'm trying to give my computer a break. I shut off a bunch of the kind of taxing video stuff in Photoshop because for whatever reason, ever since I upgraded to the latest Photoshop, it just destroys when it just eats up memory and my computer can't handle it when I'm running recording software, the camera, and Photoshop all at once. So that's going to be what you'll see for the remainder of the video until I come in at the end. So hopefully you can follow along and let's get started. So what you're looking at right here is just a loose sketch of Kirby that I did. Nothing too crazy here, just a simple line drawing. I can show you how I did that. It's fairly simple. So if you have my brushes, you'll see that I have this one called General Painter, which is kind of my blending overall painting brush. I have one called Sharp Details, which is the one that I'll be doing my lines with, as well as some tighter detail work when I'm in the final stages of my drawing or my painting. It depends on the style I'm going for. Sometimes I use that one just to kind of give a hard line look. Like if you've ever seen my Chrono Trigger portraits, the way that I used almost like a colored pencil pastel look, and I had a hardened line kind of thing around the whole deal, outlining the characters in the final painting. That's the type of brush that I use for that. This washy painter one kind of gives a blended, oily look. It's not quite oil, but the texture is nice, and it's a little bit different than these two, which can be a bit too literal in their pencilness, I guess, or pastelness. So this one helps keeps things lighter and kind of washed out, and has a more painterly look sometimes. And it's nice for blending too. The oil blender here is the mixer brush that you've probably downloaded if you've downloaded previous brushes, where I just kind of, it selects all the layers at once and then I can blend the colors between. Because I shut off a bunch of the processing stuff in the Photoshop, I'm not sure how well this will work during this process. I don't use it a whole lot, but sometimes I use it if I feel like I want to get a painterly effect in an area of a piece. And even then, because my files are so large, when I end up using it and it samples all the layers that I have, it slows down to like a halt pretty much with my computer. So what I usually do when I use that brush in particular is I flatten the whole image, I open up a new file, I basically paste that flattened image into the new file, I create a new layer on top of that image, and then on that new layer I use that brush. So all the information that I paint in with that brush, I then leave on that one layer, and then I bring that layer back into my other piece, which has all the layers before I flattened it, and I kind of drop it in there so that I have the effect of that brush, but I didn't have to like destroy my computer to make it work. Hopefully you don't have to do that, and it's not a must that you use this brush. I'm just including it because it is part of what I use sometimes. And then the Sharp Textured brush, which is the last one here, that's one that I've had on the Patreon before. I mean, most of these I've had on the Patreon before, but that one I use to do kind of almost like canvasy, textury, sharp details. It's not super literal in its canvas look. It just kind of has a nice toothy texture to it, that you can add in nice highlights. Sometimes I use it for hair. Like if you look at the Cowboy Bebop illustration, you'll see in Spike's hair, there's kind of this like sharp strand look. It's not like super sharp, but it's a little sharper than the rest of the more textury brush strokes. That's the brush I'm using there. And then I also use it for some highlights occasionally when the sharp details brush that I have selected here doesn't work, or I feel like I could get a better effect. So yeah. With that being said, let's get into it. Okay. I'm just gonna show you like how I would have sketched this out had I not already done a pre-baked Kirby. So this is fairly straightforward. It's just a brush. You can set it to 100% opacity. Sometimes I set my sketches to like an 80% opacity on the brush here, so that I just get a slightly duller line, and then I can kind of just draw on top, and it just gives a better pencil-y look. So yeah, you know, nothing crazy here. This is just how I might have sketched things out. Okay, so let's go back to our Kirby. And let's delete the other layers here, because I did a couple other Kirbys that I wasn't, you know, crazy about. Now we're going to resign ourselves to painting a kind of shitty Kirby. We don't really care too much. You know, I'm not crazy about it. So let's just do what we can with what we got. So I'm going to zoom in and just do some final lines. All right, so I'm not going to talk for a second. You're just going to watch me in real time do some final line Kirby stuff. Oh, by the way, I keep my brush pretty low for the final, I mean pretty low. I keep my brush a lower size when I do my final lines. In my final lines, I almost always keep my brush at either 80 or 90% opacity. It doesn't matter too much, because I am going to be changing the color of the lines later, so they're gonna blend in a bit more. But yeah, that's something I usually do. All right, so back to it. Okay, so we're pretty much done with our Kirby drawing. Just gonna do these little blush marks. Do the little eye reflections. Okay, so the next thing I do is I duplicate that line layer. And then I go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and then I blur it by like, let's just call it 1.6. And then I go and I choose my magic wand tool. I have sample all layers turned on. The tolerance is at 20, but it doesn't really matter. And then I select outside of the drawing. And then I go to select inverse, so that it's selecting the inside of my Kirby. And then select modify contract. So this brings my selection in a little bit more so that I'm selecting just within the lines. And now I am going to fill in my base Kirby colors. So let's just choose a pink. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is very simply just fill in the rest of Kirby. So what I'll do is I'll go to the Kirby fill layer with the pink. I'll hold down Command on my keyboard, which I guess is, what is it, Control on PC? Can't remember. So, and then I can click on the little layer window here, and it'll just select the pink of Kirby. So I'm just going to make a new layer, and I'm going to again use my sharp details set to 100% opacity, and I am going to do his little red shoes. And these red shoes are on a layer above the fill layer. Oh, by the way, I was talking about the sticky keys situation that I feel a lot of people have been dealing with in one of the previous videos. If you know what I'm talking about, it's kind of like if you use Alt or Control or Command, or you try and use the Shift key, whatever. For some reason in Photoshop with some of the Wacom tablets, there's this thing where all of a sudden that key will become stuck, even though it's not stuck on your keyboard. It's stuck in the computer, and then you'll have basically just like a continuous, I don't know, issue with either, like, it'll, like, for me, I'll just give you an example. For me, it switches to like the move tool, and then it's just stuck there. So if you have that problem, you might want to do like I did and get something like what are they called? Tour box, which is like going on a tour, and then box. I mean, you don't have to get that in specific, but a controller like that to set keys to ends up fixing that problem. So if you have that problem with Photoshop, you may want to consider getting something like that. It doesn't need to be that, but just something that doesn't use the keyboard, because for some reason that's a problem. I haven't found any fixes for it. I saw some driver stuff online about it, but nothing that seemed to fix the problem completely. So yeah, if you have that issue, there you go. That's how I solved it. Okay, now I'm actually going to change the color of the eyes so I can see my lines still. I'm just going to fill in the eyes, and that'll be the last fill. And then from this point on, we'll be painting. Okay, so let's quickly just get into the rest of this. All right, so here's how it usually goes from this point forward. Okay, all right, here's what I usually do. So I made a new layer on top of the pink fill layer. I right-clicked on it, I turned it into a clipping mask, so I already did that. And now it's just attached to that pink layer. So I can select pink on there and then choose a darker tone, slightly more desaturated. I can just shift it on this little color spectrum thing here. And then I lay in some basic shadows. And this is still using that sharp detail brush. I have it set to 100% opacity, and I'm just blocking in a rough shadow. I'll blend it after this. You'll see how I do that, but this is how I start. Doesn't need to be perfect right now. So that's usually how I start. And now I select my general painter brush, and using, which key is it? It's like that wavy key on your keyboard, the one that looks like this. I'll draw it. I know it's uninformative for me to say this, but it's basically the one where you can paint out your brush strokes. So you hold that key down. I have it set to a modifier key right now, and that's on my tour box thing. But you just hold that down, and then you can paint out using a brush what you've already drawn. So it's basically just making it an eraser. And I just soften up the edges a little bit, just to blend my shadow. And I'll do that throughout. Just kind of taking the edges down a little bit. So after that, I just have my shadow layer here. I lock the layer by clicking this checkerboard box here, this little button. That locks the layer so that everything I paint now will just stay within those edges of the thing I've already painted. So I'm going to now do a bit of a bounce light, like this. From the ground, using the same brush, by the way, using the general painter brush. And then I'll just use the eyedropper and kind of select tones between as I paint and just blend everything together. And because I want to do some subsurface scattering, I'm going to select the pink here, make it a bit red. So we're assuming that underneath Kirby's skin is, maybe some blood, maybe a big balloon of blood. It's very exciting. Okay, so I have that. Again, doesn't need to be perfect. I can create another layer beneath this shadow layer, and then I can start dropping in more blending. I like to use a lot of layers like this because I have issues with control, so it helps. No, I just genuinely like being able to do a lot of nuanced stuff to a piece and be able to change colors, and it is an aspect of just like I do want control over what I'm doing, and I like to be able to either redo things or just fix stuff. It makes it really easy to do so. You can get the same thing that I'm doing here with a soft brush. It doesn't really matter. I'm just doing it this way because I like the textures. It just adds a lot of noise, and the noise feels good when you're doing the final painting. It makes it look more real. Okay, and now I'm going to create a new layer on top of the other fill layers, create another clipping mask, and now let's knock in some shadows using that sharp detail brush. You know, you could do all your shadows at once. It doesn't really matter. So I'm gonna just kind of put in all of my tones for his eyes, or its eyes. I don't know what you. I don't know the gender of Kirby. I don't even know if it's alive or what is it. Okay, so now I got all that in place. Now I'm just going to colorize my lines. So I lock my line layer, and now I'm just going to paint that shadow color over my lines here. I might make it a little darker than the shadow, just to make sure it still pops a little bit. I just want to make sure I don't have any of the pure black of the line showing through. Okay. So now, okay, I have a little bit left to do in here. I'm gonna hop back to my shadow layer here and just blend this out a bit. Whoops, chose the wrong brush. Okay. All right, I gotta get rid of these white. I gotta get this highlight knocked in. Can't be a line in there. Looks too weird. All right. So again, we're not going for absolute perfection here, just because I want to make sure I get this across as quick as I can for you. But you can probably see just how this comes along. It's fairly straightforward, so it's not anything too crazy. It's not the most difficult process in the world. The next thing that I do once everything's together like this is I just paint on top. So I usually use my general painter brush, and then once everything's in here, like all my colors are there, I'm not really super concerned with having it just kind of like be a thing where I'm introducing a million new colors. I really am just kind of blending everything that's already here. I'm just painting on top of this. I try to do as much as I can at this stage, which I know you're looking at this and you're like, that's just a terrible Kirby thing that you put together, and that's stupid. Why would you say that that's what you do when that's done? But it is what I do. So I try to just do everything at this stage, have all my information, read, and just be there. One thing I will do that's a little different than this, and that I haven't showed you yet, is I'll take all those layers that are underneath. Once I'm like cool with all of them, I'll merge them all together like this, and then I will create, well, just to preserve the process, let's just take all these layers, turn them into a group. Where's my group? Is it not letting me do it? Oh, group from layers, there you go. Yeah, group. As you can tell, I'm a Photoshop professional. And then I duplicate my group. All right, so let's just merge everything in this group. And then I create a selective color layer. I mean, you can use curves, you can use whatever. And then I turn that selective color layer into a clipping mask by right-clicking. And then I just go through and make whatever minor adjustments I want to make to the colors. That's really the last thing I do before painting on top. I just want to make sure it looks right. Again, I'm not super concerned with this one. I ain't trying to be perfect. So, yeah. Okay, so let's get started painting over top this whole thing. I just make a new layer, and then I use my general painter brush here, and I'm just going to start my painting process. And it's fairly simple. I'm more or less just trying to clean up the edges a bit. I select around a lot. I just use the color picker, and I just kind of paint onto character and use the color picker, eyedropper tool, and then just blend, and I just kind of do that back and forth, just over and over again. I'm trying to mostly focus on having some softer edges so that things don't feel super digital. I wanted to have that nice texture. I wanted to have that nice texture so that it feels slightly more traditional. I know that it's not traditional, but I want it to be as close as I can get it with the tools that I have in Photoshop. So yeah, you can kind of see how that's coming along. So we are just going to continue painting and rendering until the whole thing's done. Just selecting all of the colors that I already have in place and painting with those. That's really it. I'm just adding a bit more value in the mouth. I mean, it's a fairly simple technique. There's not a whole lot to it. I feel like it's more about what you're able to do with the brush texture and the control you're able to get with your lines. I like the brush specifically because I can do a lot of the smaller details I want, and the blending, it doesn't feel like it flows super fast, so it's not something where a brush stroke will suddenly affect a huge swath of area and just be a bit too much for me. Like, I can do these slight brush strokes and it just kind of touches the canvas a bit and doesn't go way too overboard. It's similar to how I enjoy Clip Studio, where Clip Studio allows me to kind of do little tiny details and then broader brush stuff. This brush is probably the closest to that I've had in Photoshop so far. The closest thing to Clip, at least to the quality of control that I get. I mean, I'm doing more to Kirby right now just to kind of show you what I can do with the brush. Like, Kirby doesn't have all these weird forms in the face, so I'm just making stuff up as I go. So you can see how quickly this starts to just blend and come together. I can show you what I do with some of the other brush stuff too. In just a second. So when I'm using the kind of wash brush, it has a nice soft edge to it, but it also has a texture. Sometimes I set it to about 80% opacity and use it to blend. It's nice for softer surfaces. So for Kirby, it works pretty good, but usually, because most of the characters I paint have a lot of little details and things on them, the general painter brush is the one I gravitate towards. This one I'll use when I have a lot of small brush strokes down and I feel like they're maybe making it a little too busy. So I might use this to blend those, just to create a softer edge to those brush strokes. If I feel like there's too many little tiny details that are looking like they're drawing too much attention. It's like a quick way to do that, but most of the time I'm just using that other brush. But I would say, for instance, in the Cowboy Bebop piece, one of the things that I use this brush for a lot was on Faye's face in particular. A lot of the more rendered areas where her skin needed to feel a bit more realistic or whatever, that's where I use this brush. I had to pause my video for a bit and reconfigure my Photoshop settings and also unplug my cameras because I realized something crazy was happening with my CPU usage. It was going like through the roof. So I unplugged both of my cables since I've been recording more with Kim here on Patreon, and that seemed to fix a lot of the problems. So yeah, you can see just how I'm rendering, just blending things together. So how I would use the other brush, the last one that I haven't, well, the last couple I haven't touched on, but I'm talking about the kind of highlighty, sharp texture brush, is I'll do spot highlights a lot of times. So like, let's just select the pink of Kirby's skin here and just kind of go around the mouth, and change the opacity of this brush to 100% just so you can see what it looks like a bit more. And it has a kind of tapered edge, so it gives you a little bit of a tail to kind of paint out with, so it's not just like one big chalky brush. And you can see the texture it gives a little bit in there. I can zoom in on it. It has like a slight line to it, slight toothiness to it. And I like the way it looks. Like I'm just adding in a bunch of details to Kirby that aren't usually there because I want to show off just how the brush ends up looking. But yeah, you can kind of get an idea from that of how that starts to come together. And then the last brush is the oil blender brush, and I have it set to sample all layers. I use the eyedropper tool to select a general area of color on the canvas, and then I just paint and blend like that. So I'll like select around the blush on Kirby's cheeks and then just paint out. And it's nice because it gives that painted look, kind of oil look. So then at the end, if I were to use that sharp edge brush again, it would depend on the style I'm going for, but I use it to do final drawing lines sometimes, and this is kind of how I'll use it. I'll just go over top the whole thing and draw with it, or I'll do very fine details to just kind of sharpen everything out. Yeah, there's my shitty sketchy Kirby to show you the process. One last thing I'll do is I'll walk you through how this was implemented on the Cowboy Bebop piece, just so you can kind of see it, and I'll point out what's what, and then that'll be the end of this. So let me just do a couple little more tiny detail-y things here and there, and then we'll just call this one what it is, which is an absolute Kirby masterpiece. Yeah, I'll definitely have to sort out this CPU issue that I'm having. It just kind of came out of nowhere. Hopefully that was easy enough to follow along with. All right, one last thing. The last bit I do for these is I create a new layer by going to layer, new layer, and then I create a overlay mode layer. You click fill with overlay neutral color, hit OK, then you go to filter, noise, add noise, and then you can scale it based on how you want it to look. So I go for a good amount of noise. I don't want to keep it super sharp like this, so then I go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and then I'll blur it by, it just depends on the size of the image, but I'll change the blur depending on how soft the lines are. I want to make it match, so I just did 0.8, and now I'm going to take the opacity of the layer and drop it down a little bit, 63%. So it just adds a bit more texture to your painting, and that's what I did to get that kind of quasi, photographic look on the Cowboy Bebop piece. But anyway, let's hop over to that Cowboy Bebop piece and take a look. Okay, so here we are in the Cowboy Bebop piece. I'm just going to highlight Spike here just for the sake of keeping things simple. So this is how this piece started. I did this sketch using that brush I told you about, the detail brush, and that's my line work for it. I like to keep my sketch kind of loose, but it's not crazy loose. It's just tight enough where then I can play with it and, find something that works, and then from there I can refine. So once I have this sketch in place, I lower my opacity, like I said before, to around, 8 to 11%. It just depends. I sketched this one out with a colored line, so I probably use like a dark brown, darkish red color, just so that it didn't feel so harsh. Sometimes when I draw, I like to keep my lines colored because it gets me kind of thinking about values a bit differently, like the scale of light to dark. So this one's kind of a almost black, but not quite colored line. And then over top that, I did this drawing here. This one had I had a lot of anatomy corrections. Like if you can see from the sketch, I had the sketch with, Spike's shoulder coming way out with his arm and everything. So I fixed that in this, made him less crazy wide. And I'm going to show you all the fills that I do. So the first thing I did underneath, after selecting my lines from the outside and doing that whole flipping the inverse thing of the selection so that I can only select the inside of the lines, that whole deal. Once I do that, I create the fill, and then I start with each section of the outfit. So each one of these pieces is its own blocked in area that I then lock the layer on and then paint values within. So that's what all of this was. I just tried to get as close as I can to some kind of final. Then I do a selective color clipping mask with all of these other clipping masks, because all of those fills on top of that main fill are all clipping masks. So everything you see in here that I'm clicking on. And then I have these two adjustment layers, so selective color and then color balance. You can see what that looks like before and after, just to kind of bump the colors up, give them a bit more saturation, vibrancy. And I lock, well, actually on my line layer, you can do one of two things. You can lock the line layer and then just do colored line correction over top, just kind of painting on there. But what I did was I made a clipping mask layer and I did those colored line adjustments, so you can see just how I changed them, just to merge them a bit better with the final painting so they're not so harsh. and then I paint over top of the whole thing like this. So that's just using the eyedropper tool and just painting using the brushes that I shared with you. Fairly straightforward. And then once these are done, actually I can just turn the layer on top. I flatten the whole thing and do some final adjustments again. So let's see how that all looks. Okay, so here is that spike that you saw before. I do a few more adjustment layers, so that's hue, saturation, selective color, vibrancy. I do a bit of a soft light wash over top of the whole thing just to get some more colors. Some more values in there using colors. So I think I just used like a dark brown in here in his hair just to make it not so green, because I felt like it was leaning a little too green. And then I did a curves adjustment here, and then another vibrancy adjustment. And then I added noise to the whole thing. So you can see that noise coming into play. That same thing I showed you on Kirby. And then just a light highlight kind of thing. Just some, I don't know if you can even tell what's happening there. I'm just adding a glow to the collar and some of the bright spots of his outfit. I'll include that brush as well. I didn't initially have it included in the set that I showed you, but I'll pop it in there because it is really helpful. I set the soft round brush to about 20% opacity, and then I paint in the little highlight areas there on a normal layer usually. And then I do a selective color and then a color balance, and that was it. This was the final Spike painting that you saw in the Cowboy Bebop illustration, and I follow that same process for the rest of the characters. I mean, again, fairly straightforward. Not a whole lot changed from the initial drawing. It's mostly just me kind of painting out the hard lines and trying to give a bit more softness to like the face and things, and slight realism to the eyes and the hair, but not quite. Like, it's still very stylized. And I find that using this technique, I'm able to get to a level of finish faster. It's not this really high polish, high render type of deal, but I find that the style works quite well for finished illustration, and it comes together relatively quick. This whole Spike painting probably took me a total of like 5 hours, I'd say. So compared to most of what I do, that's pretty quick. So yeah, I hope that this was helpful. If you want me to clarify anything, you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below, and I will go through and see if I can address them. And if you feel that there was something that I missed, or maybe you wanted me to go into detail on something in specific, I can do subsequent videos. And I'm going to be doing more in general, just because this is a new process for me, and not like it's some crazy offshoot from what I was doing before. It's just a little bit different, and I'm still trying to find the best way through it. So whenever I figure something out, or things develop and change, I'm going to do more of these. So look forward to that. And I will talk to you again in the little video part of this, because I just realized while I was saying that, I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna pop back on the camera and say goodbye. So see you over there in 1 second. Well, less than this. Come on, it's editing. I'm there right now. I said I'd be back to say goodbye, and here I am. Well, I hope that was helpful. Again, I'm reiterating what I said before because I wasn't visual then. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.